In between. You know Richard. I know, he like shows up like every 10 years, doesn't he? Okay, everybody, we're going to start while we're all still here. Thanks for coming out in the rain. I always worry when the weather's bad that nobody's going to show up, but I'm glad you have, so thank you. I know many of you, I don't know some of your faces, so I'll just reintroduce myself and tell you about the program that we keep doing here, and we have more of them next semester, which I'll just tell you about briefly. My name is Dick Pullman, and I do this lunch series. As many of you know, we're sponsored here, of course, by the Povich Journalism Fund. And before we get to today's guest and talk politics and about the election, I'll just let me just tell you, I have three speakers lined up for next semester already with dates. So I'll just throw them out to you now. You don't have to actually try to remember them, but I like to be able to verbalize them because then it seems real to me. On February 20th, I'm going to host here these are all lunch. February 20th is a Monday. I'm going to be hosting Allison Steele, who is the police reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Her whole job is to cover the Philadelphia cops. So if you want to find out what that's like, she'll have many stories to tell. On Wednesday, February 29th, someone who Jill here knows very well, his name's Roger Simon. He's a political, because of the election season and the end of the Republican primaries, Roger Simon's a political columnist on the website Politico, and is a frequent guest on MSNBC and all those cable shows that we love-hate. And on someone else that Jill knows, on April 4th, Wednesday, April 4th, I am very excited about bringing a Republican strategist here. I think we really need one here at Penn every once in a while. And his name is Rich Galen. He used to work for Newt Gingrich years ago and for the Republicans on Capitol Hill. I recently saw him on Bill Maher's show. The other advantage of Rich is that he's a very funny, engaging guy, and he has his own blog. So he writes on a blog called Mullings.com, Mullings. So he'll be coming in. That'll be probably after the dust is settled on the Republican primaries, and so he'll talk about that here. But today, please introduce my guest. I'm very happy to have her here. Just in the spirit of full disclosure, Jill and I have known each other for a long time. We've been sort of road buddies on the campaign trail, beginning in Biloxi, Mississippi in 1998, and continuing through New Hampshire and Iowa and LA and Des Moines, and anyway, all points in between. Currently, she writes regularly for Tina Brown's website, The Daily Beast, and she writes for The Atlantic, a very prestigious website. You can go there and see her list of pieces there. For many, many years, she was a national political correspondent at USA Today, covered 4 presidential campaigns there. In 2004, she was named by the Columbia Journalism Review as one of the top 10 campaign reporters, a ranking that I was very impressed by that ranking because I only made the top 20 that year. Not that I remember that.
But we're still friends.
More than ever. So obviously our subject today is the Republican race, which as we know has been quite unusual and amusing and hopefully educational. But Jill will enlighten us all about it because she's writing about it so regularly. So please welcome to the Writers' House, Jill Lawrence.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I've finally cracked the Ivy League. This is it. I don't know how much attention you've been paying to this campaign. I would imagine some. And I would imagine that it's been quite entertaining for you as it has been for me. So far, I keep thinking of it like an American Idol season, where every week there's a different winner, but the losers never leave. They just come back. And the only one who hasn't come back probably wishes he had never left, and that'd be Tim Pawlenty. the former governor of Minnesota, who at this point might be the not Mitt Romney that everyone seems so intent on finding. So I've been covering campaigns since 1988, and this is really one of the weirdest ones that I've ever seen. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, we see rising to the top of the polls a man who forced a government shutdown over his seat on Air Force One, who was forced out of his own job as Speaker of the House, who cheated on his first two wives with the women who became his second and third wives, who started his presidential campaign with a Greek cruise, shopping sprees at Tiffany's, and a budget plan, an attack on a budget plan that just about everyone in his entire party supports. And then his whole staff resigned. So, I mean, you know, that's not normal. That'd be Newt Gingrich, and he's tied for first place with Mitt Romney in the polls this time. Now, the last time I gave a speech, which was a couple of weeks ago, it was to a group that happened to be in Washington right in the middle of a classic feeding frenzy. So in that 24 hours before the speech, an Oklahoma pollster said he saw Herman Cain harassing a woman. The AP broke the news about a third woman that he allegedly harassed. An Iowa talk show host told Politico that Cain had said inappropriate things to his female staff. Cain blamed the Perry camp for leaking the story. Perry blamed the Romney camp. By dinner time, Cain was fielding questions on the scandal on a Tea Party teleconference call that was moderated by Joe the plumber. But that wasn't all, because then we found out the next morning that evening he had also given an interview to a writer named Ginny Thomas of the conservative website Daily Caller. And that would be the Ginny Thomas who's married to Clarence Thomas, and that would be the Clarence Thomas who was accused of harassment by Anita Hill. And all this was, you know, just within one day. And so when I woke up this morning, I woke up to a tweet from another reporter who said, "Wrap your groggy head around that." And it was really, I mean, so it's pretty strange by Washington standards. And Rich Lowry, the editor of the conservative National Review magazine, who recently said on Twitter that he had a question for historians. Has a presidential nominating contest ever been this farcical? And that was before Herman Cain forgot what Libya was or how he felt about it. So, you know. My question is a different one than Rich Lowry's. My question is, are the Republicans blowing their chance to defeat Obama? I mean, the whole time this farce has been playing out, he's been in France and in Hawaii trying to fix the global economy. Which is quite the contrast. So, you know, the long-term question is this doing some long-term damage to the brand? We'll just have to see about that. Before I go on, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I prepared for my life covering politics by getting a music history degree. Actually, I'm not the only one. I don't know if you've ever watched Chuck Todd on MSNBC or NBC. Well, he was a French horn player, and he won a scholarship for the French horn, and that's how he got through George Washington University. And my old colleague, Susan Page at USA Today, I don't know if you know her, she's the bureau chief of USA Today in Washington and subs for Diane Rehm on NPR, and she was an oboist, and she decided to major in politics instead, or journalism. So it's not unprecedented. And we've certainly all had a lot of experience to kind of launder our strange degrees. So I've done straight news, opinionated columns, analysis, blog posts, magazine-length stories, everything in between. And I was on John Kerry's plane in 2004. It was the one and only time that I've traveled with a candidate, and I want to say that I don't want to ever do that again. It was very draining, and you know, the closer you get to these people sometimes, the less you want to know. So that was interesting. But every time that we in this field think we've seen the strangest election ever, then another one comes along that's even weirder. I mean, you know, we had Ross Perot, we had the Florida recount. We have all these elections, and you think this is historic. This will never be matched in history. And then, you know, we have Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama. We have the Great Recession. We just have all kinds of things that make this a fresh and interesting beat to cover all the time. And this is another high-stakes election. And one thing that we shouldn't lose sight of is that we're having more demographic breakthroughs this time. We have a woman, a black candidate, and we have two Mormon candidates in the Republican field. And it looks like the general election could very well be a black incumbent versus a Mormon challenger. So that is, continuing the march towards everyone being included in our system, and I think it's great. But of course, the most historic element, and you probably all know this as well as I or better, is the economy, at least at this point. When 2.5% GDP growth sounds like good news, and when companies tell the long-term employed that they need not apply, when 74% of Americans say the country's on the wrong track, and there's growing fear that the country's lost its edge, and that 9% employment and stagnant wages seem like they may be the new normal, when the national debt is going up at a terrifying rate, then these are not normal times. So this, we say it every time, and usually it's true. This is a very high-stakes election. And complicating things now is a giant heaping helping of hyper-partisanship that goes beyond genuine differences on policy and what the country needs, I think. There's a large Tea Party contingent that doesn't believe in compromises, and they're driving a party that's hell-bent on getting Obama out of the White House. And the tone for this was set right before the 2010 elections when the majority leader in the Senate, the minority leader, Mitch McConnell, said that his top priority was making Obama a one-term president. And, I don't know if he meant it the way it sounded, but that has been kind of the framing element of everything that's happened. When a statement like that is so public, then there's a lot of mistrust of motives, and I don't know if you can ever walk back from something like that. So that's where we are. I came across a great joke the other day that I think really sums up the state of play. A public union employee, a Tea Party guy, and a bank CEO are sitting at a table with a plate of a dozen cookies. The CEO takes 11 of the cookies, turns to the Tea Partier and says, "Watch out for that union guy. He wants your cookie." So, it was on a liberal blog, but I felt like it really captured the situation. And of course, so in a situation like this, there's no wonder that Congress is at 9%. And it's no wonder that Obama has finally, after trying everything else, decided to run against Congress, at least for the time being. He seems to be in a slightly better position. People really like his foreign policy. People like what he's done on terrorists. People like what he's done in Libya. They like that he's bringing the troops home from Iraq. It's unclear to me why the Republican field, based on their last debate, seems to think that people want to return to the Bush-Cheney era of foreign policy, because I don't think people do, and that's borne out by polls. So, I think he'll do well on that. The problem for Obama is that's not going to be what drives this election. So, he knows that, and the other problem for him is that you can say that Republicans are blocking everything you try to do, but that's not exactly a sign of leadership. People who don't know the details of the Senate and how you need 60 votes or there would be a filibuster, that's irrelevant to most people. It's, can he do what he says he wants to do? And the answer is no. So we have now, he's trying to do what he can from the White House, from the administration. The We Can't Wait campaign, we can't wait for Congress, for the Republicans to come through on jobs. So there's a whole bunch of things he's doing there, including health industry jobs. I think what he's doing is packaging a lot of things he'd be doing anyway, but it's a good slogan if he sticks to it. But I was in Concord, New Hampshire last month when Mitt Romney was filing his candidacy papers, and I got to say the feeling there was almost like we were in the middle of a general election. There was frantic maneuvers by cameramen to get their shot, big crowds, reporters waving their tape recorders in Romney's face. You could not get into the Secretary of State's office where he was going to be depositing this document. And I actually got knocked to the ground by a photographer who was trying to get the shot. And there was a real sense up there that we could be looking at the next nominee or even the next president. That there was a lot of excitement. And his son that day, Tag Romney, said it just seems like everything's falling into place. And it really is, particularly in New Hampshire, where Romney has never been behind. They don't seem to be spending too much energy looking for a person who isn't Romney. Everywhere else, that's going on big time. But up there, you know, I saw a poll today, he's at 40%, which is pretty good. And he's even at 50 in a general election against Obama in New Hampshire, and with Obama at 40. So that's a very strong state for him. And there's, you know, the window for someone else to take off is shrinking and shrinking, both time-wise and also, you know, there aren't too many choices as these candidates self-destruct. So, you know, with apologies to anyone who might be supporting Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann. Is there anyone here who's supporting Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann?
Shocked.
Well, the last group I talked to was the Chain Link Fence Manufacturers Association. So I had to be very careful about, you know, I mean, they were a mixed group, but you know, you don't want to offend people. I mean, there are reasons to support any of these people, but I frankly have never seen them as real contenders, just because, you know, their reach is not broad, and their campaigns have shortcomings. You know, they haven't organized, and they haven't shown broad appeal. And you know, Michelle Bachmann in particular, she had a good start in Iowa. She won the Iowa straw poll, and then she went on to a debate, and she was flying high for about one day until Rick Perry got into the race. So that was problematic. And you know, she had a history of making historical mistakes. I'm not sure why, but you know, saying that the revolution started in New Hampshire instead of Massachusetts, you know, that was not, I mean, the founding fathers fighting hard against slavery, that was a bit of a misconception. So, and she, you know, I decided on the day after the Iowa straw poll that instead of going to see Sarah Palin at the state fair, which I was kind of sorry I didn't, because I heard she had a pedicure with polka dots on her toenails. So I'm sorry I missed that. But I decided to go to a Michelle Bachmann town meeting, and it was in the parking lot in Indianola, Iowa. And it was interesting because there'd been a raft of fact checks after the debate, and I guess this was the day after the debate, and she just went and said it all over again. You know, she said everything that had been said to be wrong, she just said all over again, and there was no acknowledgement that any of this might need to be tempered or left out or anything like that. So, you know, that would have been a problem had she joined the top tier and gotten more scrutiny. Cain is the other placeholder more and more, although he does. I think that after this week we're going to see a bunch of polls showing that he's no longer holding a place. We've never elected a president without high-level experience in the government or the military, and his performance in recent days pretty much tells you why. I mean, it's been, the flame-out has been pretty spectacular, but there have been problems all along. It's just been a question of, you know, when are Republican voters going to either notice or admit that, you know, they may not like one of the other candidates as much, but this is just not going to work in terms of a general election candidate. You know, he's said he's unfamiliar with neoconservatism. He's said he might be willing to exchange prisoners at Guantanamo for an American hostage. He seems to change his position on abortion. And he's put out some surreal videos that make you really wonder kind of what their overall plan is. I don't know if any of you saw the one where his chief of staff, Mark Block, is smoking in the video. And he also has this wild parody of a Western called Yellow Roses, which is kind of a pseudo-macho type thing that with a you know, guy in a cowboy hat and boots who I think is supposed to be Rick Perry. It's very funny. But I'm not sure what ends it serves politically. You know, it's entertaining. And that's, you know, that's one of the problems with his campaign. You know, he was in Tennessee campaigning, or was he selling his book? He made his Libya gaffe in Wisconsin. Why was he there? They don't have a primary until April. You know, it's just like, it defies logic. And so, you know, and apparently that was not his only terrible moment in that editorial board interview. He also didn't seem to understand the difference between having an employee union and having collective bargaining rights. He didn't know that the feds already had unions but no bargaining rights. You know, there were just huge gaps in his knowledge and he doesn't know how to, sometimes a politician can get away with answering a different question than the one that was asked, but he's not smooth on that. He doesn't know how to segue. And, just to return to the harassment scandal, I mean, Chris Matthews called it rolling disclosures, and that's kind of how it was happening. The damage control, the management of the whole thing has been about the worst that I've ever seen in a campaign. So, that is not what you're looking for in a manager. The campaign is not auditioned for the job. And then there's Rick Perry, another meteoric rise and fall candidate. And there was a lot of talk before he got into the race. Is this going to be another Fred Thompson, who is famous and thought he had a lot of time, was going to be, ride in and save the Republicans that year from a field that looked, a little bit drab? And then 4 years before that, there was Wesley Clark, NATO general, very charismatic, good on TV, the answer to the Democrats' problem all the time of not being considered strong on national security. And he flamed out in one day by not figuring out his position on Iraq and begging his press secretary for help and with everything on the record. And Fred Thompson kind of, got to about this level and then just continued at that level, had very little energy, did not seem to be enthused about the idea of being president, much less running for president. So, everyone was saying Rick Perry is different. I have a source in South Carolina, a former party chairman. He went to some of those meetings in Austin where they all, met him and talked about raising money. And he said, oh, he's different, he's great. He's been governor of a big state. He's got this great jobs record. He's going to have plenty of money. Well, all of that is true, but those people forgot to look at, does he have any knowledge of policy? How many debates has he had in those 27 years in public office? I think the answer is 3, possibly 2. So, very little experience explaining and defending his ideas under crossfire. So, and while there were a lot of meetings about raising money, there didn't seem to be that many meetings about ideas and what he would say, what he would propose. Nor was there any kind of discussion of, how some of his Texas talk would go down outside of Texas. And so you had, the opening of the campaign with him saying that Ben Bernanke might be treasonous and he better watch out if he comes to Texas. Well, that was a threat. And I mean, that's crazy. Why did he wait until after a long planned debate on the economy to start putting out an economic plan? Why not have something to talk about in that debate instead of saying, I'll have something for you Friday? I mean, that's ridiculous, And then the other thing is that his image has taken some hits, in part because of comments like the Bernanke comment. He's now perceived as not a nice guy. People say, they wouldn't want him as a neighbor. They think of him as a bully. And so there's that on one end, and then on the other end, there's the Tea Party people who just will never forgive him for ordering the HPV vaccine or for letting the children of illegal immigrants have in-state tuition in Texas. So he's, caught in this crossfire, completely unprepared for it. And I guess, looking back, the true lesson, there's a couple of lessons we can already glean from this, which is that you really can't come in late. No matter how great you think you are, you've never run for president before. And it just is a lot harder than it looks. And the other is, escaping debates is not a good idea, even though it might seem like it at the time in your state. Oh, and then I have another, and the other thing is that you really, if you haven't had experience, if you haven't had experience in government or at least the military, this is tough. It's unprecedented for anyone to rise. There's just so much that you get. Governors get the executive ability being in the governor's mansion. Members of Congress get the breadth of dealing with all kinds of issues. They have to vote on all kinds of things. They're in all kinds of committees. They know foreign policy. They know fiscal policy. So, there's something to be said for having a little bit of practice in the field that you want to advance in. Shocking, right? So, okay, that takes care of Perry, Bachmann, Kaine as an anti-Romney. And now we're in the Gingrich phase. I don't see that happening. There's a bunch of polls right now that show huge gender gaps for Kaine and Gingrich. Something else that's not shocking. They just would, I mean, they're unelectable in a general election. And the other thing that's so interesting about the comparison that's going to be made ultimately with Obama is if you nominate someone with problems like those two have, you'll be up against a candidate who's going to be celebrating his 20th wedding anniversary the month before the election. So October 2012, we have the Barack and Michelle, sweetheart of the rodeo type thing, and then there's Mitt. I mean, I'm sorry, not Mitt. He'd be the best one. There'd be Newt or Kaine. There's just the baggage is too heavy, I think, in those cases. So, and Ron Paul is not going to be the anti-Romney because he's popular, but he has such a strange mix of issue positions, that appeal to discrete parts of the electorate and others that completely alienate the other 2 or 3 parts. So that's just impractical. And John Huntsman is probably the most electable. He's probably the most electable. I thought he came off really well in the foreign policy debate last Saturday. He's obviously got what it takes to handle foreign policy. He has the economic plan that the Wall Street Journal likes the best. I think, he's positioned himself as the thinking man's candidate, the independents candidate, the moderates candidate, and that should be working in New Hampshire because in New Hampshire, independents can vote in the Republican primary, and they are kind of an independent-minded place, but it's not working out for him, and I think, there'll be a lot of post-game analysis about why. I think working for Obama did not help, and his personality is it's most like Obama's of any of them. It's very, cerebral. He's not out there being emotional. Obama actually can turn that part of himself on. I've never seen John Huntsman that way. So he seems dispassionate, and, I don't think it's going to happen for him because there is a serviceable candidate in Romney. A lot depends on, there's all kinds of ways to go at Romney. Right now, the Democrats are going after him as a flip-flopper, which is true. But there's some school of thought that they'll eventually go after him as too conservative because that is the latest place he is on the spectrum. And I think that that's probably a good place to wage the fight because Romney has so many flip-flops that I think he's going to put a premium on consistency from here on out, and you're not going to see him switching, trying to get to the middle in the general election campaign. I don't think he can afford that because then the flip-flopper thing gets resolved. So that's my take on that. So you actually are lucky to live here because, as we've all seen, the election actually gets decided in a very small number of states, maybe a dozen states that swing back and forth. So you're going to be at ground zero here, and you'll be seeing the ads, and you're probably already seeing a bunch of primary ads. I haven't noticed a groundswell of support for Rick Santorum in his home state. Maybe one of you can explain that. But why has he not caught on?
Why is he one of the only ones that's not getting a boom lift?
He's very specialized in the sort of social cultural issues. I think that he made the most sense of anyone practically in the foreign policy debate. He wasn't one of the ones who said we're going to start from zero at foreign aid, and so Pakistan, we don't like you, so we may not give you any. He said if they have nukes, they have terrorists, they have to be our friend. We have to work with them. We have to work through this relationship. He was very realistic about that. He knows more about foreign policy than most of them, but really his calling card in the primaries is evangelical Christians, and it's not that enough of a broad constituency to win him some support. And I think in the back of a lot of people's mind is the fact that his home state, a key swing state in the election, he lost by 18 points in the last election. So, that's a deal killer if you're looking at viability. So with that, we'll open it to questions. Anyone have any? Yes?
David Morales was here Monday night. He said precisely the same thing you did about being on the campaign planes. Where's the story that we don't know?
You mean if you're on the campaign plane?
How you said there's a story you couldn't tell.
Well, I'm saying that the closer you get to these people, the further away you wish you could be.
He had to leave Washington and go to Green Bay. He was so turned off about the situation. He said, that's when he wrote the Finish Line Party book. He was on Clinton's page.
Yeah. Well, I think that, you can get to, when I was on the Kerry plane, I tried very much to take a step back. And, like there was one particular trip right after the convention where all of the swift boating broke. But Kerry was trying to be on a Rust Belt jobs tour. And so I wrote about the disconnect between, the national media focusing on the swift boat ads and whether he was a hero or whether he really was a nobody in Vietnam. And, he would go to these places, in Ohio and Michigan, and there would be desperate people who didn't have jobs, asking him questions. And the coverage in the papers would be all about jobs and what Kerry would do about jobs, or, Iraq, the issues he wanted to talk about. And so, there were real people and real problems, and they were not worried about, how he got his Purple Hearts and, this sort of thing. I mean, that was such a bogus thing anyway, and yet it was such a dominant thing. Now, I could also tell you that I thought that Kerry handled the campaign badly. The reason that all that stuck was because people hadn't met him before. They didn't know him. He had no national profile, and they didn't know if they could trust him. There were many things that they could have done, his team could have done, to explain who they thought he really was. His kids and his stepkids would have been great assets in that. But they didn't do it. They didn't think they needed to. They thought that Bush was a sitting duck. I mean, Iraq was going very badly. And so they didn't get out there after he won the nomination and explain who this guy was. And so then, all these character attacks took their toll. Yes?
Could you tell me what experience Obama had? He didn't finish the term in the Senate. So I really don't know what experience he had to make him president.
Well, he was in the Illinois Senate for 12 years. So that's a lot of dealing with issues and work, horse trading and immersion in politics. And he also was a constitutional law professor or instructor. So he, he was familiar with a lot of legal issues. And he had started out his career, doing things that were pretty political, a voting registration drive, community organizing over conditions that involved interacting with local politicians and authorities. So, and then he had the 4 years in the Senate, of which he really only spent 2 years there, but he made them count in ways that people might notice, in ways that other freshman senators have not been able to. He was able to work with he worked with Republicans. He worked with Tom Coburn to put an online database of federal contracts. And that was, a step on transparency. He worked with Richard Lugar on trying to get a handle on loose nuclear weapons. So he had some foreign policy, some reach there. I think he was on the Foreign Relations Committee, so he had a couple of years of that. He didn't have a huge amount of experience, but he'd been in government for a long time. Sure.
Go ahead.
When we see these candidates making flubs and forgetting certain agencies, can we feel sorry for them, or because they're on the campaign trail all the time, don't get much sleep under the lights on stage, or because they're running for president, we need to hold them to a higher standard?
I think both. When Perry had his terrible moment, I started tweeting, and all I was writing was OMG, OMG. It was like so awful. And when it was over, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't even look at the TV set. But when it was over, I said, I don't think this has to do with sleep. I don't think this has to do with prep. I don't think this has to do with IQ. This is just a guy who's under the glare, and it's nerves. And I think that I still believe that. I think that's true. But I felt really sorry for him. But a president can't afford to have that happen. You either need a way to get out of it gracefully, or one rule I read, someone said, you never say you have 3 things, you say you have several. You never you never trap yourself to where you're like a mess. You just say, you know, I'd like to get rid of a bunch of federal departments, starting with, and then you name as many as you can remember at the moment. I mean, there are ways experienced politicians handle this, but I don't think he was ready for prime time. I still don't. I mean, I think he's being graded on a curve. Everyone said, oh, he recovered in the foreign policy debate, but if you read his responses, and you know, clearly they weren't thinking about Israel when he said start foreign aid at zero, you know, because if they'd prepped on that, I think they probably would have made some allowance for Israel since it draws immediate, you know, reaction. You know, and the Herman Cain thing, you know, presidents are always getting 4 hours of sleep. That's no excuse. I mean, look at Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama overseas all the time in different time zones, jet lagged, you know, tremendous pressure to be at the top of their game every second of every day, dealing with life and death issues and international issues. You know, they can't plead they didn't sleep. So yeah, I feel for the guy. Maybe he should have thought more about getting in, you know, instead of, I mean, it's very embarrassing what's going on now.
I was wondering, do you think the major parties are in possible danger of becoming marginalized or something to one extreme and one extreme? Or has Obama pretty much shifted and got in the middle so that he's pretty much a solid middle, like Clinton did?
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's hard to answer your question because everything shifts so much, and things, you know, when Obama passed the healthcare law, the left was just incensed and outraged and they hated it. But so was the right. So I don't know, does that mean it's centrist? It has a lot of Republican ideas in it and it's completely based on the market. You know, and I think as it's come under siege, the left has come to see that that's the best that could be done, and my God, it's a miracle that it happened at all, you know. So I think Obama has staked out the middle, but I don't think he gets credit for that from the right, because the right is moving further to the right. And you know, you'll see with the super committee deal, you know, we'll see exactly how far to the right things have gone. It's probably not going to be pretty for liberals.
And next question is, how's the Supreme Court going to go
On health, you know, there's two schools of thought. I think if they actually consider it, they may consider it legal and constitutional. But there's also a constitutional out that they may employ to not decide it, which is that nothing has taken effect yet. The mandate hasn't taken effect, and no penalties will be imposed until, I believe it's 2015. The mandates are in 2014, and it would be in 2015 when the first people would pay their penalties. So that they could very well punt it. But there was the opinion by Lawrence Silberman the other day, the conservative judge in D.C., that was a very persuasive piece of writing. And then a cautionary note from another judge, another conservative, was that he was one of the ones I think who was saying they should punt it because it hadn't happened yet, so there's no standing to discuss it. But he said, essentially what he was saying is conservatives may be really shooting themselves in the foot if they go all out on this, because if you really want to move to a system of Medicare where people get vouchers to buy private insurance or anything else in the safety net that has to do with moving things to the private market, you will need mandates to make any of that work, or else you'll only have, you know, the sickest, the oldest, the most needy. You know, you're going to need mandates. And so if they say that this is not a tool available to solve national problems, then a whole lot of things are off the table, and the only thing that's really on the table is a public option. Do you want to choose? Or?
Do you see a connection with the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations around the country and this election coming up?
Well, I think, you know, in a sense, it's helpful to Democrats. It depends on where it goes from here. If the dissolution of the actual encampments goes into another phase of kind of more normal organizing and better financed organizing, and, you know, with some leadership and some specific demands that, you know, on both parties perhaps, then I think, you know, it helps the Democrats in a way, because a lot of Obama's proposals, a lot of things he wants to do are consistent with what they want. I think, you know, you have to be really, the establishment politicians on both sides have to be pretty careful about how involved, how much support and how much, you know, association they have with the more attention-getting elements of Occupy Wall Street. You want to talk about themes. You want to talk about policy proposals, things that would help ease the problems that they have pinpointed. But I do think it's very valuable that they are drawing attention to these problems.
You spoke about tweeting, and I was just wondering, how has the advent of sites like Twitter changed the way you approach reporting political events?
It's totally changed it, because it's the best source of news and tips and analysis anywhere. If you choose the right people to follow, you can learn everything the minute it happens, and you can get the best minds commenting on it with links. So it's just invaluable. I mean, even if you just start with well-known people like Jake Tapper, Chuck Todd, some people, and then you go, or Dick Pullman.
Make sure she throws that in. She wants to get
You go to your newspaper or your TV set, and you go to the cable stations. You see who you like. I mean, there's people, Peter Hamby, the CNN political editor. There's people who are just out there all the time. A lot of the people on the Washington publications, The Hill, Roll Call, Politico. Some of the ideological places like Red State or Daily Kos, Talking Points Memo, they're all tweeting, and they all have really good stories, really good information. The Fix at the Washington Post, that's a good one too. So there's all kinds of ways to find out real-time information now. And we were just talking about this, it changes the whole way you're watching a debate, because you can tweet the whole debate as it happens, and you can react, and you can add your wisdom. I mean, I'm on a lot of email lists. I'll get, say, an email from Gallup with some poll finding that I find interesting, and I'll make a comment on it and give the link. And it's kind of, for a competitive person, which I confess I am, you're always trying to see, okay, who's retweeting this? Who's mentioning me? How many followers did I get? And if the Daily Beast retweets something of mine, which they did with that Feel Sorry for Rick Perry one, they have 200,000 followers. So I ended up getting a few extra ones from that. So, it's a way of marketing yourself and branding yourself. It's a way of distributing your pieces. If you subscribe to my Twitter feed, you will get links to any piece that I write and pieces that I like that other people have written. But it's more than that. It's just a tremendous information gathering source. It's like your own private wire feed. So I think it's revolutionized journalism. I've also heard people say that, for network producers, it's this tremendous sleep enabler, because they know what everyone at other networks are saying and thinking and having that night, so they don't have to worry about missing anything.
Can I just follow up on that for 1 second, on the Twitter thing?
Uh-huh.
There may be actually a few people here who don't know about Twitter, where you're writing like little messages online in real time for 140 characters, very short, which actually sets up my question. There are some people who work around political journalism who are concerned that everybody is so anxious to sort of be there in the moment with these short bursts that there's no time to sort of kick back a little bit and think through analytically, because everybody just has to put it out there. Somebody even quoted a great, we're in the writer's house, it was a T.S. Eliot line saying something about the fear of measuring out our lives in coffee spoons, right? So there's this notion that if we get so hooked on Twitter that we're going to lose the capacity over time to sort of kick back and analyze. So you think that that fear is unfounded?
I think that fear is founded. You have to be very disciplined when you use Twitter, and you have to break yourself away from it. It's very useful because you can sort of, you can feel your thoughts congealing. You feel things gelling in your head as you're reading this tremendous, pipe of information, and then you have to step away. I've actually, this is the major problem. It's addicting. You're never bored. You never have a moment when you're not doing something. You can always look at your Twitter feed on your mobile device and always find out what's going on. So, I think in a sense it's valuable for those bigger picture things, because you have a sense of the landscape. You know what everyone's thinking, and you have to be very creative about coming up with your own take by synthesizing everything that you've learned. Yeah?
The political derisiveness that's in Washington now, is that going to get better, and what can be done?
I'm sorry, the political...
Derisiveness, the extremism, lack of cooperation between parties.
You know, the campaign is upon us, so I'm not sure how much that's going to improve. I wonder myself, and I actually wrote something today on Daily Beast about this, it seems to me that if the super committee doesn't work, that there may be pressure during the next year for Congress to do something that everyone wants, which is reform the tax code. I mean, if they could do that in a way that makes everyone happy, which, you know, at least allows them to go home and say, we did this. We lowered the corporate tax rate, fellow Republicans, or, you know, we got X amount of additional revenue by closing these loopholes. You know, if they managed to do something like that, I think that they would be rewarded. But right now, you know, the dysfunction just seems self-perpetuating, and I think until incumbents see polls against their opponents that show that they're going to be kicked out if they don't accomplish something, you know, that may happen later next year. So we'll see. Yeah.
Why is there never any reporting with compliance to the Constitution in terms of the policy that these candidates are coming up with?
What, for instance, what policies?
A lot of these policies are actually like this thing of making it mandatory to pay for your health care is really quite unconstitutional. You know, the drug laws are actually unconstitutional. All of these things are actually unconstitutional if you actually read the Constitution.
Well, that's an opinion that the Supreme Court is going to have to unravel the health law. I mean, there have been conflicting. 2 appeals courts have said it is constitutional. One said no, and a fourth one said too soon to act on it. So there's a lot of disagreement on that. And the weight so far is in favor of constitutionality. That, you know, and conservative judges have agreed with that. That, you know, Congress has the right to come up with, use tools to fix federal problems. That for instance, the health insurance market, which is a national market. So we'll just have to see on that. And there's been a lot of reporting on all of that. Yeah.
What does Valerie Jarrett figure in all this? Valerie Jarrett, isn't she Obama's advisor?
Yeah, she's
Who is she and what does she do?
she's a real inside player. I think, you know, her roles include, she's a very kind of soothing personality. She does a lot of, she advises him, and I think, you know, I mean, I don't know this personally, but I know that she does have a liaison role to different groups, like business, and she is supposedly someone who speaks to him honestly because she's known him so long. She's just a completely, she's on TV, sometimes not much, I think, because she's completely boring on TV. She never says anything interesting by design. So, and I think that's how she likes it and how they like it.
It'd be interesting to have sort of a comparative. Each of these people have their primary advisors. It'd be interesting to see, in a biographical sense, each of these candidates, what their advisors are all about, and the degree to which they impact or not impacting what the primary showman is, or show person.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that she is first among equals. I think he listens to a lot of people, including Joe Biden, who has so much experience. But you're right, it would be interesting to know who has the most and what exactly their roles are.
Let me ask a question about the debates. It's come up, flitted in and out of our talk here today. There have been like around a dozen, right?
10 so
There's
far.
been 10. And there's like at least another dozen or so planned between now and like early spring, right?
I think so.
Something like that.
Yeah.
All right. So the question I had is, and I was just, actually the idea for this question came from my mother, who is the first political analyst I ever knew, who told me when I was a tiny kid that she couldn't vote for Richard Nixon because she couldn't stand Pat Nixon. So that was the first piece of political analysis I ever heard in my life. But now she's gotten a little bit better. So when she said on the phone last week, she goes, why are there just so many debates? There's just too many debates. I can't stand it. There's too many debates. So actually, but serious, we'll turn to a serious question. In your mind, they're getting great ratings. Are there too many debates, or do you think the more the merrier?
We've probably had about enough. I mean, I think they're good insofar as they're revealing, and you know, it's hard to know until after they happen what they're going to reveal. And they've certainly had a lot of surprises so far. You know, there's been a lot of similarities in some of them. I mean, if the debate organizers come up with different formats and you know, kind of make them more interesting, I'm not, or focus on issues that they haven't touched yet. You know, there was an article somewhere about all the questions, maybe it was on the Daily Beast, I think it was Peter Baynard. There's a lot of questions they didn't ask in this foreign policy debate. So maybe there'll be another one and these questions will be asked because there hasn't been, you know, depth of information. And all we've done is we've had some gotcha moments and we have a bunch of people saying, yes, we want to go back to torture. Well, you know, there's a lot of follow-up questions you could ask about that. So I think they are valuable, and I think, you know, there's a chance that further ones will be valuable. And if people don't want to watch them, then they won't watch them, and then the ratings will go down and we won't have so many more. But so far, I think it's been a good thing. Anybody on this side of the room? Yeah.
In China, there are a lot of newspapers and journals, but more and more people don't believe the articles said about the government or something. They don't believe it. But the news online, people who maybe the population, people, citizens write on themselves, lack of depth or the reality, because they don't have the ability to deep what's the reality behind the news, behind the stories. So how could
You're talking about the lack of credibility of the media and the lack of depth online.
people just read some news online, by the others write about, maybe they know something about us or their ideas, comments, but it's not professional. So
Well, it is true that there's a lot going on in the media and not all of it's reliable. It's very hard to know what to do about that. There are a lot of fact-checking organizations these days. Of course, you know, sometimes the fact checks kick off their own controversies. You know, I mean, I think, you know, the debates are good for that, in that you just, you know, what you see, you're getting what you see. You see it unfiltered. It's not the media making up that, you know, that Rick Perry made a jerk of himself in a debate or had a really bad moment. You know, it's not. And I think video is also very important, increasingly important. You know, now that newspapers and other outlets will tape their interviews with these people, you can see it yourself. You know, you can judge it yourself. And, you know, even despite all of the skepticism and, you know, people who go to a conservative source or a liberal source to get their information, you know, at first it didn't seem like the sexual harassment allegations were having any impact on Herman Cain. But, you know, people saw what was happening. They made their own judgments about the woman who came out and what she said. They made their own judgments about the second woman. They made their judgments about the fact that there were 4 allegations from 4 separate women. You know, and gradually it sank in, even though, you know, Rush Limbaugh was putting out the word that it was just disgruntled liberals, you know, attacking a conservative for no good reason. So, you know, there are ways to cut through the clutter, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just you have to want to, and it takes time and it takes a media narrative building. And the more video, the better, I think, because just let people see it themselves and make their judgments. Yeah.
Why do you think the candidates are subjecting themselves to all these debates? Who decides the number of debates? Is it the media companies or the candidates?
Well, as Al Gore might say, there's no controlling authority. Nobody decides. You know, people, media outlets and ideological organizations decide, and candidates decide whether to show up. And like, for instance, I was talking to somebody, there's a PBS debate that's scheduled in Iowa, but it's probably going to be canceled because Perry and Romney have said they're not coming. But there's a Heritage Foundation, AEI, and CNN joint venture that I'm sure everybody's going to go to. partly because of the sponsors. I mean, I guess, there's always this hope that you'll make your breakthrough. If you're John Huntsman or Bachman or Rick Santorum, there's always, you get a huge audience, and it's that's a big draw for a lot of these candidates. And, for Rick Perry, once you do badly, he at one point said he wasn't going to participate in so many, and then they backed off that because they realized that, well, maybe there are too many, but our reasons for, everyone knows why we want to back out, so we can't do that. We just have to keep going and try to do better. So, I think that everybody would like for there to be fewer. And ultimately, there's not going to be 24. There's been 10, there's probably going to be 15 or 16, and that'll probably be it. That's a lot, but, last time there were 20. And don't forget, as you get into the season, there's fewer and fewer people on stage. People drop out, people lose, and so it gets more and more meaningful in terms of the nomination race because you only have maybe 3 people up there on the stage, or or 2. So, at some point, the whole tenor of them will change. There'll be less the gotcha moments and waiting for someone to have some painful moment, and more, okay, let's pick these people's brains and see who we really want to elect or nominate. Yeah.
Do you think Sarah Palin will suddenly show up at the end? I'm thinking that she's back there for some reason.
I don't think so. She apparently was on Fox last night giving advice to the candidates, and one of the journalists tweeted that it was painful to listen to. So I think, probably what the pain was that the advice was not very good. I don't know. I should go back and look. But, she was a kind of an interesting phenomenon, but I think it's over. I think it's over. I mean, I just, to me, the elections last week in Ohio and Mississippi and some of the other places, it's not the party of Sarah Palin and Sharon Angle and Christine O'Donnell anymore. I think there's a lot more soberness in the Republican side, and that's why you see, they try someone out, he doesn't make it, gone. She doesn't make it, gone. They're just rotating through, and they'll end up with a solid candidate. I think she saw her chance to capitalize on fame, and it was her best opportunity. It was, it was a pretty heady experience, I think, that campaign, and she was really catapulted into a situation that was pretty amazing for her. So I mean, I don't blame her, but it wasn't the right move to run for higher office because people look at that and think, she left. She didn't even have one term as governor. So, that's what I think. What were you going to say?
Do these candidates, these clowns who are running a Republican Party ticket, do they actually believe the dribble they're spewing? Or is it just for the idiots in Iowa in order to get the Iowa vote? And second part, if I may, if they're not spewing that, how are they going to get the rest of the country to accept the opposite?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know. I mean, I can picture a debate with Obama where the Republican says, about going to war with Iran. Only kidding. I don't know how they're going to handle it. I think, when there's a nominee, the polls will be a lot clearer on what policies are going to be popular and not, because there'll be a clear choice. The problem for Obama is that if the economy is terrible, a lot of people may just say anything but this. So, it's a question of how far out on the limb do Republicans have to go before the voter, the middle of the road voter, says, that's an inch too far. I'm going to stick with Obama. I think they do believe a lot of what they're saying. I do. But I think some of it is probably, open to being rephrased in more diplomatic language. I mean, they haven't actually said they would go to war. They basically said the exact same thing Obama has said, you wouldn't take it off the table. I mean, the thing that makes me crazy is listening to them, particularly Newt Gingrich, saying, well, Obama hasn't done one smart thing on Iran, and the moderator says, well, what are the smart things? And he goes, well, we do maximum covert activities. And I'm thinking, well, okay, how would you know? what Obama's doing in the covert area. You can't know, but you can, most people would assume that there's a lot going on, and there's been some reporting to that effect, but, if they're covert, so it kind of on in that, that respect. There are ways that they may be able to maneuver back into a different way of saying something that sounds less inflammatory. But I think, it's particularly on foreign policy, that's going to be difficult. And I'm not sure how it's going to go on the economy. Certainly people are not happy with Obama on the economy, but they also know what he stepped into when he came into the job. So, that's his only saving grace, that and the fact that he's tried. And I do think, the Democrats have just been abysmal, terrible at explaining things. I mean, they have failed on the stimulus. They have failed on health care. They have not explained what they've done and why they've done it and what the results have been. So, if somebody with a lot of money, like one of these super PACs that we all love to hate, if someone with a lot of money goes up and explains the stimulus and pounds it into people every day for 2 months, that, here are the statistics, this many, Rick Perry has said not one job was created by the stimulus, but actually 2 or 3 million were. So, I mean, you just, and this is by the arbiter of the Congressional Budget Office, which everybody loves to use when it's on their side. So, I think there are ways to kind of make the Republicans accountable for their rhetoric, but I also think they have ways to make it seem more palatable to a broader audience.
I'm just going to throw out one last question, then we're going to wrap up. By the way, Jill was on Marty Moscowane's Radio Times this morning. If anybody wants to hear the podcast, it's online. The last question, and this is perfect segue from what you just said. If you had to make a guess today, the best educated guess, even though predictions are so treacherous, what do you think Obama's odds are for re-election? Or a percentage? What percentage do you think?
Is this assuming a competent communications strategy?
This is assuming that the Republicans can actually say, that the Democrats can actually say, hey, here's what healthcare has done already for you, et cetera, et cetera. And assuming a competent opponent, what do you think his chances are? Better than 50-50?
I think they're slightly better, like 52%, which is about, 53 is what he got the votes last time. I think they're slightly better because I just, the candidates are all flawed, but he's the one that has, we've seen him perform. And for all the things that he's always being yelled at about, weak this, concessionary that, people like that they like that he tries. They like
9.1% unemployment, how do you have to explain that somehow? And that's not explainable.
But if
you
you
can't
can't
get
get
that
jobs
breakdown,
done now.
It's not gonna happen.
I think I'm not saying you can go and blame Europe or blame China, but, no president is going to be able to control a lot of these forces. And I think that, I think he's going to have to explain what he did, how it's helped, what other forces are at work, and how he would go forward and try to fix it. And then people can compare that with Mitt Romney, who's been, very dismissive of everything that has happened, even the things that he will do the same if he's elected. Because his policies, particularly internationally, are not that different. So that's my guess, 52% chance, and Republicans are going to work to make sure that he doesn't accomplish anything until then.
Maybe a long election night.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.